No kingdom, no army, no wealth. Yet within a few years, he would build the largest empire in human history. Cities burned, nations collapsed, and the world learned to fear one name: Genghis Khan. In the 13th century, the world trembled before one name. Cities vanished in flames, empires collapsed overnight, and millions fled in terror from an army that seemed unstoppable. But the man behind it all was once just a starving child abandoned by his own tribe. No kingdom, no power, no future. Yet, from the brutal lands of Mongolia, he rose to build the largest empire in human history. Some called him a monster, others called him a genius. But one thing was certain: the world would never forget Genghis Khan. Before he became the man who terrified the world, he was just a child trying to survive. Temujin, the boy who would one day become Genghis Khan, was born in the harsh steppes of Mongolia, where winter showed no mercy, and the weak rarely survived for long. He was still very young when his life suddenly turned into a nightmare. One day, his father left on a journey and never returned. He had been poisoned by his enemies, leaving the family alone in the endless wilderness. In a single moment, Temujin lost protection, lost food, and lost his tribe's respect. Even his own tribe abandoned him and his family, leaving them to die of hunger. The young boy searched for wild roots and hunted rats and small fish just to stay alive. Hunger was not just a feeling. It became his closest companion, and during the freezing nights, he could hear wolves drawing closer through the darkness, while his mother tried to hide her fear from her children. But deep within that suffering, something dark began to grow inside Temujin, something forged by pain, betrayal, and a burning desire to take revenge on a cruel world that had shown him no mercy. That starving child would one day become the man who made the entire world tremble in fear. Hunger was not the worst thing Temujin faced. Betrayal was. In the world of the Mongol tribes, weakness was never forgiven, and those without strength became prey. Temujin grew up surrounded by fear, but the thing he feared most was people. And one day, he finally fell into the hands of his enemies. He was captured like an animal, with a heavy wooden collar locked around his neck, displayed before others as a humiliated slave. He could barely move, and with every step, it felt as though his dignity was being crushed into the dirt. The boy who once dreamed of becoming a warrior was now a helpless prisoner, at the mercy of men who wanted to humiliate him before killing him. But they made one fatal mistake. They believed chains could break Temujin. At night, while the guards slept, the young boy stared into the freezing sky, his eyes burning with rage. He was not only thinking about escape, he was thinking about something far greater: revenge. And in one bold moment, Temujin managed to escape into the darkness, running across rivers and endless steppes, like a wounded wolf, refusing to die. From that night on, the weak child disappeared forever. The birth of a new man had begun, a man who would one day force the very tribes that humiliated him to kneel before him. After years of hunger, betrayal, and slavery, Temujin was no longer the frightened boy abandoned by his tribe. He had survived the cold, survived the chains, and survived a world that wanted him dead. But survival was no longer enough. Now, he wanted power. Across the endless Mongolian steppes, tribes fought each other without mercy. Brothers betrayed brothers. Alliances were built on fear and destroyed by greed. It was a brutal world, and Temujin understood one simple truth better than anyone else: only the strong could rule. Unlike other tribal leaders, Temujin did not care about noble blood or ancient traditions. He rewarded loyalty, punished betrayal without mercy, and slowly, warriors began to follow him. not because they loved him, but because they believed he could lead them to victory, battle after battle. His name began spreading across the steppes. Temujin was no longer just surviving, he was rising, and with every enemy he defeated, his army grew larger. His influence grew stronger, and his ambition grew darker. The boy who once hunted rats to stay alive was now becoming one of the most feared warriors in Mongolia. But Temujin's dream was far greater than revenge. He did not want to rule one tribe or 10 tribes. He wanted to unite them all, and soon, the entire Mongol world would hear a new name spoken with fear: Genghis Khan. For centuries, the Mongol tribes had been divided. They raided each other, killed each other, and betrayed each other for power. No tribe trusted another, and no leader had ever managed to unite them all. But Temujin was different. He understood something the others did not. A divided Mongolia would always remain weak, so one by one, he began crushing every rival standing in his way. Some tribes joined him willingly, inspired by his victories and fearless leadership. Others resisted and were destroyed. The battles were ruthless. The steppes ran red with blood, and every victory pushed Temujin closer to absolute power. But his greatest weapon was not fear alone. It was loyalty. Unlike the old tribal chiefs, Temujin promoted men based on skill, not family bloodlines. A poor shepherd could become a general. A loyal warrior could rise beside kings. For the first time, many Mongols felt they were fighting for something greater than their tribe. They were fighting for a nation. And slowly, the impossible began to happen. The scattered tribes of Mongolia started becoming one people under one banner. Then in the year 1206, tribal leaders gathered together on the open steppes, and there, before thousands of warriors, Temujin received a new title, a name that would soon shake the world itself: Genghis Khan, the ruler of all Mongols. The year was 1206. After decades of war, betrayal, and endless bloodshed, the Mongol tribes were finally united. For the first time in history, the warriors of the steppes stood together under one leader. But on that day, the boy who once starved in the wilderness would disappear forever. Across the vast Mongolian plains, thousands of warriors gathered beneath the open sky. Horses thundered across the grasslands, banners waved in the cold wind, and tribal chiefs bowed before the man they once feared. This was no longer just a tribal leader. This was the birth of something far greater. As the crowd watched in silence, Temujin was given a new title: Genghis Khan, a name believed to mean universal ruler. And from that moment on, the world itself would begin to change. Because Genghis Khan was not satisfied with ruling Mongolia. He wanted more, far more. He dreamed of an empire without limits, an empire that would stretch farther than any in history. And soon, his armies would ride beyond the Mongolian steppes, bringing fire, destruction, and terror to every land in their path. The starving child was gone. In his place stood a conqueror the world would never forget. Genghis Khan did not build his empire through numbers alone. He built it with the most terrifying war machine the world had ever seen. The Mongol army moved with incredible speed. Its warriors could ride for days without rest. They survived freezing winters, brutal storms, and endless hunger. Every soldier was trained from childhood. Every rider was deadly, and together, they fought like a single unstoppable force. The Mongols were masters of horseback warfare. They attacked fast, disappeared into the horizon, then returned without warning. To their enemies, it felt as though they were fighting ghosts. But their greatest weapon was not strength. It was fear. Before invading a city, the Mongols often spread terrifying rumors ahead of them. Stories of entire cities burned to the ground, of rivers filled with blood, of armies wiped out without mercy. And many times, Their enemies surrendered before the battle even began. But if a city resisted, the punishment was brutal. The Mongols destroyed everything in their path. Walls collapsed, palaces burned, and survivors carried horrifying stories across the world. Yet behind the destruction was a brilliant military mind. Genghis Khan used spies, strict discipline, and complex battle tactics far ahead of his time. His generals communicated across massive distances with astonishing speed. His army adapted quickly to every enemy they faced, and one by one, kingdoms began to fall. What started as scattered tribes from the Mongolian steppes had become a force capable of shaking entire civilizations, and the world was about to witness just how far the Mongols were willing to go. Once the Mongol tribes were united, Genghis Khan turned his eyes toward the rest of the world, and the world was not ready. From the deserts of China to the mountains of Persia, the Mongol armies advanced like a storm that could not be stopped. Kingdom after kingdom collapsed before them. Cities that had stood for centuries were erased in days. The sound of Mongol horses became a symbol of death itself. When their banners appeared on the horizon, panic spread before the battle even began. Some rulers surrendered immediately, hoping for mercy. Others chose to fight and paid a terrible price. The Mongols attacked with terrifying precision. They surrounded massive cities, cut off supplies, and destroyed armies far larger than their own. No wall seemed high enough to stop them. No empire seemed powerful enough to survive them. Northern China fell into chaos. The great Khwarezmian Empire was shattered. Entire regions were left burning behind the Mongol advance, and with every victory, the legend of Genghis Khan grew larger. To some, he was a military genius unlike any the world had ever seen. To others, he was destruction itself. But whether people feared him or admired him, one truth became impossible to deny. Genghis Khan was building an empire the world had never seen before, an empire forged through fear, war, and conquest. Where the Mongols marched, fire followed. Entire cities disappeared beneath smoke and ashes. The sky turned black, and the cries of the dying echoed across the conquered lands. For those who resisted Genghis Khan, there was rarely mercy. The Mongols believed fear was a weapon more powerful than swords, and they used it perfectly. When a city refused to surrender, the Mongol army surrounded it like wolves, closing in on prey. Days later, the walls would fall, and once they entered, the destruction began. Homes burned, palaces collapsed, streets filled with chaos and blood. Survivors spoke of rivers turning red, and mountains of bodies left behind after the massacres. Some cities were destroyed so completely that they never recovered again. The great cities of Central Asia, once filled with wealth, scholars, and trade, were reduced to ruins. And as terrifying stories spread from one kingdom to another, fear traveled faster than the Mongol horses themselves. People abandoned cities before the Mongols even arrived. Some rulers surrendered without a fight. Others prayed their kingdoms would be spared. But Genghis Khan saw terror as part of conquest. To him, a destroyed city was a warning to the next one. And with every burning city, his legend grew darker. Across Asia and beyond, people began whispering his name, as if he were not a man, but a force of nature. What began as a struggle for survival in the Mongolian steppes had become the largest empire the world had ever seen. Under Genghis Khan and his descendants, the Mongol Empire expanded across continents with terrifying speed. From the Pacific Ocean in the east to the edges of Europe in the west, their banners stretched across vast lands no empire had ever united before. It was an empire built on conquest, fear, and absolute power. The Mongols controlled ancient trade routes, powerful cities, and millions of people from different cultures and religions. For the first time in history, travelers could move across enormous parts of Asia under Mongol protection. Merchants crossed deserts once filled with danger, ideas, technology, and knowledge spread between civilizations. But behind this massive empire stood the shadow of one man, Genghis Khan. The starving child abandoned by his tribe had changed the course of human history forever. His empire became so vast that it seemed impossible to control, and yet, generation after generation, the Mongols continued expanding their dominance across the world. No ruler before him had conquered so much land so quickly, had spread with such unstoppable force, and even centuries later, the name Genghis Khan still echoes through history as the man who built the largest contiguous empire the world has ever known. By the year 1227, Genghis Khan had conquered more land than any ruler before him. Empires had fallen, cities had burned, and millions lived in fear of his name. But even the greatest conqueror in history could not escape death forever. During a campaign against the Western Shah Kingdom, something happened to Genghis Khan. Some said he was wounded in battle, others believed he fell from his horse, and some whispered that illness was slowly consuming him. But the truth was never fully known. As his army continued moving across the harsh lands of Asia, the conqueror, who had once seemed unstoppable, grew weaker, and then, the man who shook the world died in silence. No great speech, no final victory, only mystery. Even in death, Genghis Khan remained surrounded by secrecy. According to legend, his followers hid his burial place to protect it forever. Some stories claim that anyone who witnessed the funeral procession was killed to keep the location secret. To this day, no one truly knows where Genghis Khan was buried, but while the conqueror himself disappeared into history, his empire did not. His sons and grandsons carried the Mongol banner across continents, continuing the expansion of the greatest empire the world had ever seen. And long after his death, entire civilizations still remembered the terror of the man called Genghis Khan. Centuries have passed since the death of Genghis Khan, but the shadow he left behind never truly disappeared. His empire eventually collapsed. The Mongol armies vanished, and the cities they conquered were rebuilt over time, yet history never forgot his name. To some, Genghis Khan was a ruthless destroyer, a man responsible for unimaginable death and destruction. To others, he was a brilliant military genius who changed the course of history forever. He united the Mongol tribes, created one of the most powerful empires ever known, and reshaped the world through war, fear, and conquest. Even today, his legacy can still be felt across Asia and beyond. His tactics influenced future armies, his empire connected distant civilizations, and his story continues to fascinate millions around the world. But perhaps the most terrifying part of his legacy was not the empire he built. It was the fear he created, a fear so powerful that centuries later, people still whisper his name with awe. Because Genghis Khan was more than a conqueror. He became a legend born from hunger, forged by pain, and remembered through fear.